Okie dokie. All right, so let's take a look at the biurim over here, and then we'll continue forward in the Imrei Yaakov. There's a mitzvah to give a person his wages on time, and if you violate that, you're over on 5 mitzvahs lo saseh, 1 mitzvah saseh. But that's if you have no intention of paying him at all. But if you intend to pay him, but you're just late, so you're only violating 1 mitzvah lo saseh and a mitzvah saseh. Okay, fine. Laseh schar, over below saseh. So the Biurim writes as follows: Kol adam ha'osa im chaveru pu'ula otova. Anytime a Ruvain does something, a favor or a job for Shimon, lo yuchal chaveru lomer lo b'china masisa imadi hol v'lo tzivi sicha. So Shimon cannot turn around to Ruvain and say, thanks for doing this nice job for me, but I never hired you, so you can't bill me for it. So, for example, Ruvain notices that his neighbor Shimon is in Florida, and he sees that something's happening to his house. It's getting flooded. So he goes ahead and he does whatever he needs to do to prevent the flood from happening, or he hires a plumber or whatever it is. Shimon cannot turn around to Ruvain and say, that's very nice that you did that for me, but I don't have to pay you because I never asked you to do it. But rather, you have to pay him his wages for doing that labor for you. Because of al zeh harav, I'm not sure. Beis Daled. What does Beis Daled stand for? I don't know what it stands for. The Mikan Nira, the Misha Amad, from here, you may infer that if someone goes ahead and takes care of a sick person without that sick person's request, shechayev l'shalim lo, that the sick person has an obligation to pay for that service even if he did not request it. And he cannot say that the person just did it for the sake of doing me a favor. This is brought down in the Sefer Mishkanos Haroyim. He says, but it would seem obvious to me, says Reb Stern, that you don't have to pay him on time. Like, in other words, you're not obligated to pay him at the end of the day if it's a certain period. Since you didn't hire him for that job explicitly. But rather, you as we'll see later on here, if I hire someone via proxy and I don't hire the worker directly, then I'm no longer in violation of Baal Tolin, of not paying on the proper time, and we'll see why. The only time you're in violation of this mitzvah lo saseh is if you have money to pay him, but you defer because you'd rather wait. But the chidusha Rabbi Kiva Eger kasav zelushano v'sham b'chinuch kasav avalim ein yachol leparo ba'oso yom ela im kein yovad harbe mishalo lo chiev hakasuv bazel lefi hadome. Rabbi Kiva Eger says that he is of the opinion that if a person has difficulty paying on the day that the person completed the job, because he would lose a lot of money by taking that money and using it to pay the laborer instead of, let's say, paying off a debt. Okay, and let's say he just doesn't have the cash available to be able to pay him properly, then you're not going to be in violation. And the question is, why should it be that if it's difficult for you to pay, or it's going to cost you more money to pay him on time, that you're not in violation, that you're putter from this mitzvah. Don't we have a principle that in order to avoid violating any mitzvah in the Torah, you have to expend great amounts of money, even your entire, just because kosher food is more expensive, doesn't mean that you can say, I'm going to cut corners. Why can you cut corners here and say, it's going to cost me more money if I pay him today, so I'm exempt from this mitzvah? And he says, and he continues along this line, and he tries to answer this question. Well, anias daiti, but it would seem to me, says Rav Stern, hayanira litaritz al pi divrei hachasam sofer, shekasav al masha pasuk sham harama da'alosa seyitin kol mamono kodem sheyavor. He says, it would seem to me that the Ramah talks about this issue, that a person has to pay all of his money in order to avoid violating a mitzvah lo saseh. Because of zeh hachasam sofer v'zelushono lanias daiti lap b'mitzvah saseh v'lo saseh tal yamilsa ela ikum va'avor oshe ve'al taisa v'fulei. He says the Chasam Sofer says that it's only if you have to proactively do an action that violates the Torah. That's where we say that you have to expend as much money as possible to avoid proactively doing an action that violates the Torah. Veins are like eating non-kosher food, because you're actually doing an act of eating. So you have to pay whatever it costs to get the kosher food, and you can't say, well, it was too expensive for me to observe kashrus. He says, for example, the Chasam Sofer says, the Torah says that you're not allowed to leave over certain sacrificial parts unburned until the morning. What happens if, in order to fulfill that mitzvah, you would have to expend your entire estate to make sure that that doesn't happen, whatever theoretical situation you were going to come up with? The point being is that the Chasam Sofer says that it's only if you have to proactively do an action, that's where we say that you have to spend as much as you can to avoid doing an act that is contrary to the Torah. But being passive, shev al taisa, being passive, and the passivity is what is going to make you in violation. There, you're not obligated to spend your entire fortune in order to avoid being in violation. So that's what the Chasam Sofer says. And the Chavos Yor says the same thing. The whole Bahalav de lo Solim, excuse me, he says, since this issue of not paying a person his wages is a passive violation, I didn't do something which makes me in violation. I didn't pay you when I was supposed to, means that I did something wrong, but I'm still not proactive in my wrongness. And in that scenario, I'm not obligated to spend the fortune to avoid a passive violation. So that's the distinction he wants to say, Rav Stern, which seems very logical. In other words, if I simply don't have the money, or I would have to go into hak in order to get the money at a high interest rate in order to be able to pay you on time, that I'm not obligated to do, to incur significant financial loss in order to fulfill this mitzvah, because correct. Taking a passive approach makes you in violation of the Torah. But let's say you're taking a passive approach because you simply don't have the funds. And in order to procure the funds, you would have to take out a very steep, high interest loan, and it would cost you a lot of money. So that you're not obligated to do. Ibra ein davar zeh muskam aliba dekuli alma. He says, but that's not something that everyone agrees to. Not everyone agrees to the Chasam Sofer's principle, but now is not the time for us perhaps to expound on this issue. Okay. Anyway, he just basically says it could be that even Rabbi Akiva Eger was had in mind everything that I've just written, and that really that's what he meant. Okay.
Rabbi, I guess this scenario is so different from what we talked about before because this was an unexpected expense as opposed to when you hire someone, you know how much it's going to be and you have to have the funds to pay them. Here, this expense was not a known one because it happened and you didn't know it was going to. And so maybe that's why the
Well, you
leniency as
raise
well.
you raise an excellent point, Paul. Would I be lechatchila allowed to hire someone knowing that I won't be able to pay them when payment is due? So that seems to be that you wouldn't be allowed to. You can't put yourself in a position where you're allowing yourself to be in violation of the Torah. And to give the answer that, well, I'm putter because I don't have the money, but you put yourself in that position. So I don't think that Rav Stern is advocating that lechatchila you'd be allowed to put yourself in that position. Okay.
Yeah, this is a unique circumstance. The story that was given about being away and something happening.
Yeah, you're away. Something happened. No, the first part of this halacha was a different issue. The issue is this paragraph actually brings us two different halachic points. The first halachic point is that if a person works for you and does significant work that, by all estimates, is something that benefits you and something that you would want, then you're obligated to pay them for that work. You're not obligated to pay them what the worker asks for. You may only be obligated to pay what the lowest person would take for that for that job, because you didn't stipulate a price at the outset. So that's point number one. And the reason why this is connected to our halacha for today is because he just wanted to make a point of saying that the prohibition of paying on time does not apply to that situation because there was never an agreement between the two parties. That's halacha number one. Halacha number two is that what if you don't have the money to pay a person at the end of the day? So in that situation, according to some poskim, you're not in violation of kovesh schar schir, or what's called bal tolim, of not paying on the proper time. Okay, so I think those are two completely separate issues. They're connected by a thread, which is that when I get back from Florida, I don't have the cash. The guy can't have tainas on me that he did a job for me, so pay up. So that would be a scenario that would connect halacha A to halacha B. But these are two separate points. Okay.
Right, but I guess what I'm suggesting is because it was an unknown expense, you weren't obligated to set aside funds to pay for it.
That's right. That's right. And so, right, and that's the reason why you can't be held responsible to pay. But in a situation where you hire someone, you have a responsibility to set aside that money. What would happen if something would happen? All of a sudden, the money that you thought was there got stolen, or something else of that effect. That the money got lost, or whatever it was. So then, according to this, to the Shulchan Aruch that Stern quotes in the Biurim, you're going to be patur from the violation of that we're dealing with over here of Bal Talin, because you had every intention of paying him, but something happened over the course of the day or the work period. Okay. Okay, so I think, is there any more likutim? The last thing that we left off with, I remember now, we got involved with Ron's question, that we went through the advice of the Chafetz Chaim, which is stipulate up front what the job is going to cost and make sure that everything is clear And as they say, Barachel bitcha haktana, right? Make sure you know that phrase, Barachel bitcha haktana. Yaakov in Parshas Vayetze, when he stipulated that he wanted to marry, stipulated with Lavan that he wanted to marry his daughter, he says, I'll work for you for 7 years, Birachel, right? So Rashi says, he specifically said Rachel because Lavan could have switched it with another daughter. And in the event that Lavan could have found a Rachel from some other family, he said, Bitcha, no, I want to marry your daughter named Rachel. And in the event that Lavan would have switched their names and called Leah Rachel, he said, then the word Haktana, your younger daughter. In other words, he wanted to make sure that there was no wiggle room for Lavan to misinterpret or reinterpret the contract. So when you say to someone, I want us to be very, very clear and specific, you say, let's do this Barachel bitcha haktana. Okay, that's the origin of the phrase, because sometimes when you deal with people, number one, innocent misunderstandings can take place, and sometimes not so innocent misunderstandings can take place. Okay. Okay, velo savo alav hashemesh. The Torah says, do not allow the sun to go down on him by not paying him. In other words, don't let the sun go down on him. Yeah, the Gomer. The Elav hu noseas nafsho, and as the Torah says, he is placing his soul upon you. In other words, his dependency is upon you. So he quotes the Zohar. He says, "V'isa b'Zohar hakadosh, man da'ashlim nafsha demiskena," that if you make the soul of a poor person whole by supporting him and giving him what he needs in order to live, afilu dematu yomoye liistalka me'alma, even when the time comes for you to leave this world, kud shabrichu ashlim lenafshe v'yohiv le chayin yatir. God will extend your days and let you live longer by virtue of the fact that you made someone whole. By the way, we just had this in the Daf Yomi not too long ago. The Gemara had a debate whether a person's life can be extended beyond what was originally decreed or not. So the Zohar clearly holds that even if you had a preordained number of days to live, you could actually go extend beyond that by your actions in this world. And now I refer you to the Zohar that tells you really scary things about what happens if you do the opposite and you don't make up a poor person's life whole, and you allow them to because of some business deal that you made with them, you didn't pay them, and you didn't pay them on the time, and the guy has to go home without food to be able to feed his family. The Zohar has some really, really harsh words about such a person, and we'll see at the end of Sif Yud Ches what the Rav Shulchan Aruch himself has to say about this. Next, over belav, you violate a negative commandment. If let's say he says, "Kach mitzvah lasei schar behema o kelim bizmana." It is still also a mitzvah, not only to pay wages on time, but also to pay for a rental of what you owe on time. So let's take a look at Nuntes in the Imrei Yaakov, o kelim. Davka demei sichi rasam otikunam. This is when you rented an appliance or you asked someone to fix it for you, and he provided you with a service and he fixed your item. You have to pay for the service. Avalim asahu uman kli mishalo. But let's say the artisan made the utensil on his own. Agam shenas al pi hazmanas abalabayis. In other words, when you have an artisan who manufactures a kli, and he did it through the order of the balabas. Balabas goes ahead and orders and says, I want you to manufacture a widget for me. Mikol makom hol v'hakli atzmo shayach leumen avi kishar chayfet shenimkar she'ein bo mishum bal talin v'ayin sif yud gimel. As we'll see when we get to sif yud gimel, when services are rendered, you have to pay immediately. When goods are delivered, so then you're not going to be in the violation of this particular isser. There may be another isser that you're in violation of, but it all depends on the terms of the exchange. Usually when you exchange goods for money, the money is due upon the delivery of the goods. But there are certain times when the delivery of the goods does not create an obligation to pay, and that we will get to in a couple of seifim from now. That's a different issue. So then, and the source for this is over Balab Shenemar lo sa'ashok sachir ani ve'avyon me'achecha u'mige'erecha asher be'artzecha bish'arecha, that you may not oppress a poor laborer from your brothers or from the stranger that is in your land. Biyomo titein schar, you must pay him on that day. Okay, so the Imrei Yaakov says sachir ani v'yesh omrim da'afilu al pachas mishava pruta over hame'acher zmano. Some say that this violation is so severe that you're in violation even if the amount is a paltry amount, less than a pruta, but you withhold it, you are in violation. The gam bekatan shesa, I don't know why that should be, because I don't know why that should be. Anyway, he quotes the Rashba saying that, which is interesting. The gam bekatan shesachar leizu pu'ula shaykh bo baltolim, and this halacha applies even if you hire a child, a minor, to do a job for you, like mow my lawn, take out my garbage, whatever it is, and even if the child is not yet bar mitzvah, but you can be in violation of baltolim by not paying him on time. V'ra'isi anashim shemishtamshim bekatan be'eza davar shel tashmish u'mavtichim lahem she'yitnu lahem achar kach davar ma avor zeh. I noticed that there are some people, he just observes this, that hire children to do a job and they promise you, I'll give you something. U'lebatsof lo nostim lahem klum, and they exploit the children. They end up not giving them anything. V'shelo kedin avdi, he says, and this is not right. He's quoting the Chafetz Chaim here. The Isser Kedisha Sar Schar Sachir Shayach Afilu B'Meleches Pruta Echas V'Afilu B'Katan Shayach Zeh. He says, because not paying someone what they are expecting at the time when they're expecting it, you are oiver on Bal Tolim, and this is true even if it's less than a pruta, and it's true even if it's a minor. V'Afilu La'acher Et Zmano Asr D'Shayach B'Bal Tolim, and even just to delay payment is a violation of Bal Tolim. The kol shekain lichbosh legamrei da'aser, and certainly to never give the person what you owe them is a terrible violation of this halacha. And he quotes the Chafetz Chaim in Avas Chesed, umatzoi hadavar b'shemar teif, babysitter, shelokchim yalda lishmor al tinok, mavtichim la schara. He says, you get a babysitter, you get a little girl to babysit, and then you promise you'll pay her something. You must pay her at the end of the evening. You can't say, oh, it's late, I'll just give you the money later. No, you have to be very careful. Make sure you have the money available and make sure you pay her what you owe her. Okay. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch had said that why does the Torah make a point of saying that this is asher ba'artzecha, that it's in your land? So he said, Ma tamalomer ba'artzecha, v'halo kol davar shu chovas haguf noig bein ba'artz bein l'chutz la'aretz. We know that this is a mitzvah that is on the person, not an agricultural based mitzvah. So why would this mitzvah only apply in your land? Why does the Torah say that if it's in your land? So it doesn't mean that it only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Ela l'rabos kol davar sheba'artzecha, that it includes all matters that take place over the course of a regular life in your land. Meaning, that's what the word artzecha, meaning it doesn't just limit itself to paying a worker's wages on time, but anytime payment is due for services, you are obligated to pay. So even if it's not labor services, even if it's a rental of an item, you are obligated to pay. Avol al schiras karka, yesh mi shomer sheino over shenemar be'artzecha velo artzecha. It's only that you can make the argument that for rental of real estate, you're not in violation if you don't pay on time, because of the word artzecha. It doesn't say artzecha, it says be'artzecha, that which is on top of your land, but not the land itself. That's the way that some posts can learn. And we'll just do this one, Imrei Yaakov, be'artzecha velo artzecha, gam lefi shita zu, mikol makom al schar dira yesh lahakpid. He says, even according to this opinion that is cited in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, you have to be careful about paying rent on time. He says, the yesh omrim debayis mikri talush, kevin shahaya talush v'nit chaber, because there is an opinion that any structure that is above ground, since at one point it was detached from the ground and was later attached, then it is subject to some of the stringencies of chattel, even though it technically has the status of real estate. And so therefore, if there's any Torah law that applies to chattel, let's say paying for services on time, you need to apply it to an apartment building or to a home that you're renting. And furthermore, there is another opinion that you are in violation of Bal Talin even for real estate. Okay, and this is actually stated explicitly by the Sifra, by the Medrash on Sefer Vayikra and the Balei Tosfos. And so therefore, it is very important to not use this as a dispensation and say, oh, well, I don't have to, I'm not in violation of the Torah when it comes to real estate. It's not something that you should rely upon. The question is it actionable, right? Can you give a guy lashes for it? Perhaps you can't, but certainly every Jew should make sure that they pay their rent on time, because according to some opinions, you are in violation. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about rentals of property. It's Hashem. Tomorrow we'll have another likutim that I want to go over. So we still have just a few more things to cover on this in the Sif, and we'll hold it here for today. Chag Sameach, everybody. Happy Yom Ha'atzmaut.
Sameach.
And we'll see you.